All right, and welcome back yet again to the Paisan Sports podcast presented by Elevation 5280 Sports. Dante DeBlasio joined as always by Zach Deal of What's the Deal Sports. So I've got to ask, what's the deal with the Sixers? They're terrible all year. When we want them to turn things around and start winning, they keep losing. Everyone gets hurt. So now we all say, you know what? This isn't so bad. Maybe keep losing. We can get a top 5 pick, maybe get Cooper Flag. All right, I can get behind this. We'll come back better next year with a top 5 pick. And then they start winning. They won the other night. What's that about?
Well, I mean, they won one game, so I can't even be mad.
It's too
Also,
many.
with the one, listen, so you're mad about the one game that they did win, and I'm looking down at my phone. I am paying attention to the podcast. I'm looking down at my phone because I'm looking at the lineup that they implored for the Jazz game. And did you see that lineup? Did you
Yeah,
see the
it's
box score?
that lineup is going to be one of those like meme lineups. You know, when people like on Twitter, like, what's the worst lineup you've ever seen? And then they send old screenshots of terrible lineups. That's what that is. Yeah.
I feel like it's more so the starting lineup has talent. Like if you've been paying attention to the Sixers, I talked about how like I'm kind of hype on Justin Edwards. He was like a top high school recruit like a year ago, and he ended up on the Sixers after not having like the best college career at Kentucky. So I'm actually hype about him. He has some promise, and they just converted his contract that I brought up on the podcast a couple weeks ago. So he has some promise. Andre Drummond's a solid player, but he played like 10
Oh
minutes
wait,
and he
no,
was
no, no,
terrible.
no. I was more so referring to the lineup from last night against the Hawks, which was a starting five of Jared Butler, Quentin Grimes, Lonnie Walker, not just yeah, Justin Edwards, and Gershon Yabusele. Like
Yeah,
that
well,
that
this
lineup
one
will go
is
down in history as like a
This
who
one
are
is
these
this
people lineup.
this one is the same with Andre Drummond and Kelly Oubre in the lineup, but Andre Drummond and Kelly Oubre are only playing 10 minutes and 20 minutes. So, and then like the bench is just outrageous. Like some of the players that are coming off the bench, like Jeff Dalton Jr., Lonnie Walker, like played for some
Alex
good
Reese.
teams.
I haven't even heard this name
Yeah,
before.
that's actually a name I'm being completely honest, I have not heard of. So that just shows you
Yeah.
its depths. But I was referring to that lineup because that was the game that you were mad about that they lost. But like if
Oh,
you're
right.
putting
Yeah,
that
that makes
lineup
sense.
out on the floor, like you can't even be mad if they end up winning. Like you're actually surprised and you're like, wow, like a team like that can actually win. It's not like the Jazz are putting anything better out there themselves, but yeah, I mean the Sixers at this point it's completely all in tank mode. I mean Paul George hasn't played recently. Um, Joel Embiid's obviously shut down for the season. Eric Gordon's shut down for the season. Kyle Lowry, I don't remember the last time that he played a game. Andre Drummond barely plays, and even in games that he does play, like you saw versus the Jazz that we mentioned, he was playing 10 minutes. So I think they're even, Kelly Oubre might even see a minutes restriction like limit to his game, maybe like 25, 30 minutes, never anything over that. And it's just all in to secure the best possible draft pick at this point. I mean, what else could you really achieve for?
Well,
It's
the thing is, however, it's like the difference between this season as a tank season and other possible seasons as a tank season is it's not like, we're just watching them lose games now. It's like, all right, let's see how good of a first round pick we can get. No, they need to secure their first round pick because it's top 6 protected. So if it falls out of that top 6, they don't even get to keep it, and this entire tank season was for nothing. So this is
well,
actually a bit of a
the
dire
thing that
situation.
scares me. What they have 2 games coming up. I'm looking at the schedule now. I think they have like 2 back-to-back games coming up with the Raptors. Let me see. They have a game versus the Raptors on Wednesday, and I think they have another one coming up very soon against the Raptors. And the Raptors and the Sixers both have 22 wins. So the East has like 3 teams: Brooklyn, the Sixers, the Raptors all have 22 wins, and then you have the Hornets with 16. Washington's like atrocious with 13,
I
and
thought
then
they
in the
had
West,
17.
it's Utah, who's the worst team in the West, who the Sixers just rolled out that lineup to and beat. And then the New Orleans Pelicans that like Zion plays every so often. So like there's a chance that the Pelicans could eclipse the Sixers if they're trying to like put people in the seats. Brandon Ingram, I don't remember the last time he's played a game this year. DeJounte Murray got hurt for the season. CJ McCollum's still playing every night, and Zion Williamson's playing every so often, depending on, I mean, just kind of like the same Zion Williamson, like amount of games that we've seen him play. And they also have, I'm blank on his name right now. I think it's Trey Jones, who's like a really low key player in the NBA, or Trey Murphy, averaging like 22 points. So, I mean, the Pelicans like are probably the most talented team out of like all those bad teams I just mentioned. Like if they keep playing
Yeah,
Zion,
they
there's a
could
chance
very
they
well
can.
start winning
The
some games
Sixers play. Let me look
tomorrow
at.
night against the Raptors,
Yeah, the
7:30.
Raptors and them had the same exact amount of wins. The Raptors have one more loss, and if I'm looking at the season series, so that game will be the
So
third
that's a
game.
crucial game then.
And
The
then in the
Sixers
month of
need to
March,
lose to the Raptors.
yeah, in the month of March, the 30th of March will be the last game of the Raptors Sixers series. So they play them twice in March,
Need to
and
lose both those games for sure.
yeah,
I
this is
want to
probably
see.
one
I
of
want to see an even worse lineup tomorrow night. I don't even want to see Quentin Grimes out there. I want to see Alex Reese get the start over Quentin Grimes. Is what I want. You know what? I want them to bring Tony Roten's old ass out of retirement and give him the start against the
Tony Romo.
Toronto Raptors.
We can bring Samuel Dallenberg out of retirement and play him at
Sammy Dallenberg. Let's get Mo Cheeks out of retirement.
Mo Cheeks. Mo
But yeah,
Cheeks.
no, the one final thing I will say is the one thing that is kind of nice is this is the first time in many years that we actually get to look forward to the draft lottery, because we actually have stake in it.
I know, but there's
Yet
also
again.
been absolute nightmares with the hindsight that we now have. Excuse me, but the hindsight that we now have of all the draft picks and how they've ended up working out. I mean, Joel Embiid, I'll never be mad about that pick. They got him as the
Oh yeah,
most
no, that
talented
was
player.
easily the best.
And
The
look at
best
the two guys in front of him.
made.
I love Andrew Wiggins, but he was never the player that Embiid was. I mean, Jabari Parker, like how many years was he relevant in the NBA for? So that will always be a good pick. But Markel Fultz, Ben Simmons, we got a little bit of use out of Ben Simmons, but it just didn't end up with the longevity that we thought it would. So I would say that pick was bad. Like we could still have Brandon Ingram here if we ended up making that move. But I also will say in the time period, I would have never probably picked Brandon Ingram over Ben Simmons as much as like
No,
there was like
at the time,
Brandon
Ben
Ingram
Simmons
was really good though at the
was
time. I mean, remember that was the time when Brandon Ingram was like the next KD. That's what they said without like without the same lethal 3-pointer, but like as a mid-range shooter with the size and everything. But Markel Fultz was an absolute whip, especially
yeah.
when Jason Tatum should have been the pick, and the Celtics were going to take him at number 1, or they were going to move back like they did and get him at 3. So, but with the Sixers, I mean, they're a guy that we talked about before that just doesn't get the hate that he should, and Daryl Morey, the comments that he just made about Sixers fans operating off of anger, regardless of if he was making a joke or not. I mean, the guy is just an absolute clown, in my opinion. I think
He
he's
needs
just
to
an
go.
absolute
He
clown.
needs to
He doesn't get
go.
criticized in the light that he should get criticized because I feel like people don't even care about the Sixers since he's became as GM. I feel like people held on for so long, and it wasn't just because the Eagles are good right now or the Phillies are also good. You know what I mean? Or there's another team that plays in the city during that time period. And the Flyers might not be relevant to everybody in the city, but there is a huge Flyers fan base that like strictly watches Flyers hockey and probably doesn't watch a lot of Sixers basketball. So they're definitely down the totem pole, but talking about like series being entertaining and not actually like relevating, any relevance it having to winning or anything like that. I think Daryl Moore is just completely, he can't read a room. He's just, incompetent for the job. And that's why we talked about on the last podcast when we had the long-winded comments about the Sixers. That's probably why the rumors about a guy like Bob Myers potentially getting in the front office and maybe taking Moore's job have been floating around.
Yeah, but anyway, let's move on and let's talk about a team worth talking about, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles. That's a super. Actually, wait 1 second. That is the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Just got this
There you
shit.
go.
Pretty fire. Kelly Green, Super Bowl champs. Love it. Yeah, I wanna start off with quick question actually. Zach Bond, the re-signing, did that happen before or after our last podcast? Have we talked about that yet?
Yes, we talked about that was the day of our last podcast, and that was the
Okay. All
Wednesday.
right.
So
So
we
so
talked
then the thing I want to talk about is, since there really haven't been many positive moves by the Eagles so far, I want to start off with what I think is a positive move that they made is the Kenny Pickett trade. And I tweet about this. I think this is good. It sounds like such a minor trade, but I think it's good for three different reasons. One, you clear up $2.5 million in cap space. Nothing crazy, but then again, it is a minor trade. Two, you get a fifth round pick out of it. And three, and most importantly, in my opinion, is now you elevate Tanner McKee to QB2. I think so. I think there's a three solid results out of that one trade, and that's why I actually I think it's an underrated trade. I really like it.
I don't really. I mean, it didn't really move the needle for me too much.
It doesn't move the
Kenny Pickett.
needle, but I mean, you get three solid benefits from it.
Yeah, I think they have more ammo. I think they have like what I had the draft picks on my phone here. The amount of draft picks they had, they added a fifth in that. So um, they now have after the CJ Garner Johnson trade, which we'll get into, but they now have 4 fifth-round picks, and
Mhm,
then they have their 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the
mhm.
compensatory picks got mentioned today,
And
where
yeah,
the
the
compensatory picks
Eagles
are going to
don't
land.
have
So
any, which it comes as
no,
no
but it
surprise
it
because they didn't
it
lose anybody last year.
no, the thing that it did was it seeded the picks though in the selections from round 4 to 7, so they actually
Oh,
have the
right. Yeah,
number of
yeah.
the selection it will be now. So, um, just since we're talking about that right now, real quickly, I think that those 4 fifth-round picks could be used as a trade up ammo in a potential trade in the draft. Maybe if you want to move up a couple spots because you think a team's going to take you out for something, and you add like a maybe a third and a fifth round pick on it. You know what I mean? To move up 5 to 6 spots or something like that. I'd have to look at the exact draft chart value, but they have a lot of picks. Also, before I think there was a misconception. I know that you brought it up on the podcast, and I was telling you that you're wrong. The Hassan Reddick trade only nets a third round pick, and that's in 2026. He
Yeah,
did
I
not
thought
move
it
his
was
dress.
two with the possibility of it turning into a one, but no, it was a three with the possibility of turning into a two. So yeah, I was incorrect on that.
Yeah, it
I
was
did
never
I did
that.
notice that the other day.
And it is a third round pick because he didn't meet
Yeah,
his
he didn't he
percentage of
didn't do
snaps or
anything.
sacks. So that's just that. But with those picks, yeah, I think they could be used to maybe move up in the draft. I mean, also in that spot where they traded CJ Garner Johnson to today, which was kind of a shocking move. It's not a move that we kind of saw. I thought CJ Garner Johnson was actually a little bit underpaid. I don't know if he went to the front office and tried to ask them for more money. I don't know if Saquon did that or they went out of their way to give Saquon the money. But they felt like they needed to move on from CJ Garner Johnson, get younger at that position. I think they're keeping in mind of all the contracts that are coming up in the future by making that move. They want to play. They obviously showed by making that move they want to keep Reed Blankenship here for longer than they wanted to keep CJ Gardner Johnson. But I mean, in the 2 years that CJ Gardner Johnson was here, 12 picks, 6 in 2 different seasons. I mean, he was a very impactful player, a guy where they made the Super Bowl acquiring him at the end of the offseason, and he leaves, and then he comes back and they win the Super Bowl. So, I mean, the impact of C.J. Gardner Johnson was definitely there. And just talking about the trade now, just because we have the draft picks here in front of us, it's not the craziest net in return. I guess the cap space that they open up by it is beneficial for the Eagles. And like they said, even CJ Gardner Johnson himself said on I think it was Twitch today when he was talking about the trade that they wanted to pay the younger guys, and there's no hate or anything like that, but he wanted to get traded to a team where he can compete at a championship level. So I guess the Texans, even though they just got rid of one of their star players, are a team that's trying to still compete with a guy like CJ Stroud that and has a playoff win in his rookie and his sophomore season. So they're trending in the right direction, even though they kind of look like they're taking a step back in a way with the roster. But for the Eagles standpoint, that trade, so those two trades with Kenny Pickett, I don't really have too many comments on it. Tanner McKee, I don't think Tanner McKee. I think he's definitely earned that second backup spot, but I don't really think there's like an actual future for him on the Eagles. I think just for now, I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson is most likely not even going to make the roster. He's actually the worst quarterback statistically in NFL history. He actually has the worst stats. He has the worst TD to int ratio in the history of the NFL. So he's
Yeah,
actually
well,
a
in
bad
two
player. He has good
starts,
tools, though. He has
in
good
two
tools, but
starts last year, he threw 0 touchdowns on a 51 completion percentage and 6 interceptions. So just a
yeah. So for
horrible.
him, it makes sense. I mean, if you're gonna make that trade for Kenny Pickett, you're probably only gonna get a fifth back, and then if they want to throw in a player that's comparable to the athletic skill set, as in like a runner that Jalen Hurts has as a quarterback, then maybe that's why. And
Yeah,
also
and
the Eagles also like having three quarterbacks. So
yeah, and
I
the
think
other thing it
Ian
does.
Book's not good, but I think it's Ian Book versus Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Having the third quarterback on your roster is definitely a conversation. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like how
here's
they
the
had Ian
thing.
Book as the fourth guy
Here's the thing
last
about
year.
Dorian Thompson Robinson. One, it's very obvious Tanner McKee is going to be your backup quarterback. So, if Dorian Thompson doesn't end up being anything of value, that's no problem at all. But here's the thing. One, he is extremely athletic. He had a great final 2 years at college. So there is talent there. It just depends if you're able to shape it or not. And the other thing, too, just a very minor thing to note is when the Eagles are going to be preparing to play somebody like, let's say Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson, then you at least have a mobile quarterback on your roster that can mimic that quarterback in practice for the defense to prepare for them. So that is another like small benefit of at least keeping.
I feel like they should make Greg Ward that guy, the scout team quarterback. Greg Ward.
Greg Ward, actually, I saw on Instagram, Greg Ward will be playing this spring for the San Antonio Brahmas of the
Good for him. I
UFL.
remember him in college. He was nice at quarterback, and then obviously the Eagles got some slot usage as a receiver out of him. So, but yeah, those were the
One
two.
one other thing with that, real quick, I was looking at some of the UFL rosters, just to see if there was any names I recognize. There is one team, I forget which team, but out of the USFL conference that has two former Eagles receivers. One of them being Dion Kane, and the other one being an Eagles preseason legend, might I say, Dion Kane, and the other one being Nada. I forget his first name. I think it was Anthony Nada. Another
Yeah, it
recent
was. I think it was. Wasn't it Joseph Nada?
Joseph Nada, yeah. And another recent Eagles preseason wide receiver. Dion Kane, though,
I
he
feel like
showed.
wide receiver for that league specifically, wide receiver is the best showcase that you can have. Like it might have
Oh yeah,
potential translation back to the NFL. I think isn't that where Cavante Turpin was like the USFL like stars like a Canadian football like
I think
MVP or
so.
something like
Yeah.
that. So he just
Speaking
got a
of
big contract.
Turpin, that's one of the Cowboys' big moves this offseason. They cleared up all that cap space, and all they've done with it was they signed a long snapper. They signed Javonte Williams, who's been horrible the past few years, and they kept Cavante Turpin. I think that's hysterical.
I think Cavante Turpin's good. I think Javante Williams
Oh
is
yeah,
just
he's great,
bad.
but he's a special teamer. It's not,
I
and
think
it's
he
just a
might
guy
have an
you're
elevated role in
keeping.
the
You're not
offense, and
bringing
like he
anyone
might be
in.
able to do something with it. I'm not talking like 1,000-yard receiver, but I think he could be a good gadget tool if he's used correctly. And I think he will have an expanded role in their offense. I don't think they would pay a returner just $6 million to specifically just do that. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of besides the Commanders, the Giants today signed Javon Holland to a 3-year, $45 million deal, and that happened right before the Eagles traded C.J. Gardner Johnson. But if you remember correctly, I think I brought this up on a podcast previously. Javon Holland was actually one of the players that spoke out about Vic Fangio when he was with the Miami Dolphins. So
Mm.
I don't know if that's what led to the Dolphins not retaining him, but he was like a 24-year-old, 25-year-old safety that was on the market. That's, a very good player at his position. He only got 15 million per, and the Giants pivoted from not paying McKinney last offseason to spending at the same position. And not only that, they spent at the same position. Javon Holland is good, though, but Xavier McKinney obviously had like an all-pro type season this year. The Giants gave Darius Slayton 3 years, $36 million, when the Eagles gave Saquon Barkley last offseason 3 years, $37 million. How
Yeah,
disgusting
yeah,
is
they
that?
didn't want to. They didn't want to give that contract
But they
to
give it to
Saquon
Darius
Barkley, but
Slayton.
they had no problem giving it to Darius Slayton. I mean, that GM is such a joke. He's an absolute joke.
So let's look at that real quickly, and then we'll get back to the Eagles
They
just
didn't
because.
even offer it to Saquon Barkley. They didn't even offer it to him.
So Darius Slayton, before obviously Saquon got his new deal a week ago, Darius Slayton's most receiving yards in a season was 770. So we talked about the comparison when I brought up Saquon possibly getting money, and then it was like happened the next week after that, as if they listened to the Paisan Sports podcast, which was funny. But
Maybe they do.
um, what's his name that we were Khalil Shakir got 4 for 60, and his most was like 830 yards. So the receivers are just getting crazy money nowadays. I mean, I remember my connections to Joe Flacco. My dad was his high school football coach at the time. He signed the richest contract in NFL history after not after the Super Bowl. He did sign that after the Super Bowl, but a couple years later, he signed like a 3-year, $66 million contract, which was like 22 million per for a franchise quarterback. And now like mid-level wide receivers are almost like Josh Sweat's like 3 million off a Super Bowl MVP quarterbacks deal. You know what I mean? From a couple years
Yeah.
ago. So that just shows how crazy that is. And also, talking about the Cowboys and how everybody besides the Commanders have really been aggressive. The Cowboys haven't spent more than $6 million in free agency since 2015, and that
When they
contract
signed
was given
Greg
out to
Hardy,
Greg
yeah.
Hardy, who I've
I
watched
mean,
as a huge
it's
UFC fan. I've watched Greg Hardy get knocked out cold numerous times and bet against him as a big UFC fan. But it's just ridiculous how
it's
they operate.
insane. Because here's the thing: it's like for a while they were getting away with it with not spending in free agency because they were drafting so well. So they were able to get away with it, not fully because they didn't win anything, but in terms of being a team that's at least sort of in it. They were able to get away with it. But their past two drafts have not been good. They have not drafted well the past 2 years at all. So they're not getting away with it anymore. So far, after 2 days of legal tampering, they have not spent in free agency. And if they don't spend this free agency, and they have another bad draft, then they're in serious trouble as an organization. They're also losing to Marcus Lawrence to free agency this year. It feels
And I
like
haven't
every
heard any
week.
rumor tying him back to Dallas or any mention of him possibly going back to Dallas. So, I mean, that could be somebody that the Eagles are even interested in.
Yeah, he is a bit older now. He is 32. He wasn't How the hell was he a Pro Bowler in 2023?
He's a
But
good
yeah,
run
he is
stopper.
a bit
His
older
sack
now. He's
numbers
not.
have been diminishing. But let's get back on track with the Eagles a little bit and not spend too much time on all the foes. We got more time, especially when the rosters actually fill out and we can talk about them. We'll talk about the Commanders in a little bit and some of the moves that they made. But let's break down the moves or the lack thereof from the Eagles and some of the departures that we've seen from the Eagles so far. So let's start with Josh Sweat. He gets 4 years, 19 million per, 76 million to go back with Jonathan Gannon, his former defensive coordinator from the 2022 Super Bowl season, and he lands with the Arizona Cardinals. How do you feel about that move? What do you think about the impact of him leaving the roster, and how do you just see all this playing out?
I mean, Josh Sweat leaving. with him getting that kind of contract, that makes sense. You're not going to pay Josh Sweat that much money, especially when you have the big thing with the Eagles and free agency this
I
year,
don't
which
know
I
if I
think
would phrase it that way. I think it would more so go knowing that I have to pay Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith,
that's what I was about to say.
specifically on the D
That's
line.
what I was
Not
about to
that I
get
wouldn't
into.
pay, not that I wouldn't pay Josh Sweat 19 million per, but it's with the thought that I have to pay those guys. Like if
Yeah,
Josh
that's
Sweat was
that's what I
my
was
best
about to get
available
into.
option,
I
I
was
might have
about to
to
say what I
end
was
up
about to
doing that.
say. What a lot of Eagles fans, I think, don't realize this free agency is there's a lot of young players the Eagles are going to have to pay pretty soon. So you can't just go, giving out contracts now and then you're not able to keep the more important guys when they are owed contracts, such as Jalen Carter, such as Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell and Nolan Smith and N'Kobe Dean. Yeah,
There's a couple names that like kind of get thrown out there in the
Cam
contract.
Jurgens, Landon.
You just named
Has
the two
Landon
people.
Dickerson been paid yet? I don't think
Yeah, he has. You
he
just
has.
named
Yeah,
two
he has. He
people that I
has.
think are not locks in any scenario to get a contract extension with the Eagles. N'Kobe Dean and Cam Jurgens. I don't think they're locks in any sort of
I think
scenario.
Jurgens is a lock. I would not call
I
Dean a
don't think
lock.
so.
I think Jurgens is a lock. They
I mean,
always spend
maybe
money to
if
draft him.
If this trade for Kenyon Green, the guy that they got back in the CJ Gardner Johnson trade, a former first round pick from 2022, 15th overall pick that was rated like the third worst guard in the league last year. But this was also another conversation that we had on the podcast a couple weeks back about um, the Eagles maybe not signing Mekhi Becton back because they see that the opportunity that they have having a guy like Jeff Stoutland and just giving him any resource and he can mold the clay into what he can. So if they go the route of Kenyon Green as the starting guard, which there's a good chance that they do that and don't sign Mekhi Becton back, then maybe Cam Jurgens. But if they decide to pay Mekhi Becton,
Listen, shaping this guy into a great guard. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not doubting if Jeff Stoutland can do it, but it is a big if because he was not good at
well,
all.
this is
But
also an
going back to let's not get too off topic. Going back to what I want to say about Josh Sweat is so yeah. Listen, you're not going to be able to pay him a $75 million contract. All right, so you're going to have to let him walk. It's unfortunate, but you have Jalix Hunt, who you're high on. You still have, I guess, you still have another year of Brandon Graham. Of
That's
course,
also something that we failed to mention for some reason on the last podcast that he retore his triceps in the Super Bowl. So Nolan Smith and him both tore the
we
triceps in
brought
the
that
Super
up.
Bowl.
We brought that up.
It might have been the podcast before that, but regardless, you have two guys on the edge now that are coming off that. I mean, it would be really impressive if he has the drive inside of him. He might have the drive inside of him to do it and attempt it, but for it to actually successfully work, a guy at that age coming off two tricep tears in a matter of like 3 to 4 months, that's extremely tough. So I wouldn't count on Brandon Graham being on this roster at all, especially with the comment that Howie made back in the day was he got attached to too many players after the 2017 Super Bowl. So I think Brandon Graham, I don't think he would seek trying to play for another team just because of the injuries that he was going through. I think it would be with the Eagles or not. I don't know if the Eagles would steer him in the direction of retirement, but it just seems like a crazy feat for a guy to tear his triceps at 36 years old twice in a matter of that many months and to come back and be effective or even be anything. I would bring him back in a role where we don't see him the entire season like James Bradbury and he's just there as like mentoring the guys on the sideline, but he's actually still on the roster getting paid. I would take him in that role. But and you could probably just make him a coach at that point if he's going to retire and not actually suit up. But I really can't rely on Brandon Graham next season.
No, you can't rely on it. I mean, the main thing you're relying on is Jalix Hunt. You also have
Yeah.
the draft
But you have
coming
Nolan
up
Smith coming off the
with
same
Jeff
injury as Brandon
Wilson.
Graham too, which you expect him to recover. But it always seems like people are like, yeah, Nolan Smith, we're paying him. We know we're paying Nolan Smith. But like when we talk about Nolan Smith now, we're not talking about like what's actually currently happening with him and him being injured and how that's like another thing on top of it. You know what I mean? Like that's another layer to like the need at the edge position. It's not just that we have Nolan Smith and then we have to replace the edge on the other side if we don't feel like Jalix Hunt. We just lost Josh Sweat, Milton Williams that sometimes filled in on the outside of the defensive line. And we have one of the guys that's slated in there who's one of our best guys on the edge, who is the best guy on the edge, who's hurt. So, I mean,
Yeah, well, that's the other guy we got to talk about is Milton Williams. That's another contract that I would be upset if the Eagles paid that contract. We're talking
yeah,
about
I think that was
$26
I
million
think that's
a year. And the thing with each of these free agents that we're going to bring up, I am going to give you a player that is going to step in for them that I have a lot of confidence in. And the guy I'm about to name now is the one I have the most confidence in stepping up, and that is Moro Ojomo. Who he is so underrated because he didn't get a ton of playing time this past year, but he is so dominant when you watch the tape. Of course, he had what was it, the second or third highest win rate in pass rushes. So I I really like Moro Jomo. I think he's going to do just fine stepping in for Milton Williams. I don't think it's worth paying $26 million. As much as I liked Milton Williams, don't get me wrong, he was a beast. But, to pay $26 million to a complimentary piece on your interior D line who's performing as good as they are, largely in part to the fact that you have Jalen Carter eating up all the double teams. To give $26 million to that guy, it just wouldn't be worth it. You do have Moro Jomer behind him. And for the Patriots, I like Milton Williams a lot, but I'm not sure if he's gonna be as good in New England with him attracting the double teams this time around. So we'll see how that plays out. But do wish
yeah,
all
that
the best to
contract
him.
was pretty crazy in my opinion. And
Yeah,
you know what's
26
great?
million a year. That's insane.
Yeah, that's like fifth highest defense attack on the league. I mean, Jalen Carter's
Third
no
highest.
shadow.
Third highest, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
I could be
So
wrong, but I think it was third highest, which is like,
it's somewhere in
dude.
that vicinity in that range. And that's obviously he got the newest contract on the market. That's the biggest contract. That's the biggest contract in Patriots history, and they had the best player of all time on the roster. So that just shows you how crazy that was. But I mean, the Patriots were aggressive. You saw different teams around the league taking the exact formula of what did you see what the Vikings have done? They signed Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave to their
I
defensive
did
line.
see
I
that,
mean,
yeah.
so you're seeing
That
teams
that's
just
always
go
been
all
I feel
in.
like that's always been the identity of the Minnesota
And the
Vikings is
Patriots, I
building up
actually
the
also the
defensive
Patriots on
interior
top of that
line.
before free agency actually started,
Interior
since
line,
Harold
I mean.
Landry got released before free agency started, they signed him as well. And I actually had the Patriots trading for Harold Landry with his connections to Mike Vrabel, but they ended up signing him after he got released. So they went in on the defensive line. That was a team that I talked about. Only had 28 sacks in 17 games last year. But it was like a thing that people aren't talking about with Milton Williams. He's getting 26 million. He was on the roster during the days when the Eagles defensive tackle rotation was so thin to the point where they had to sign Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph in their latter years. And where was
Yeah.
Milton Williams then producing? You know what I mean? I'm not a hater on Milton Williams by any means, but it was something that I just randomly remembered when I saw that contract. I was like, Milton Williams has always been good, and I always thought highly of him. But there was times where, like even last year, people were talking about Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter can't stay conditioned, and there was no mention of Milton Williams, who started like 10 games last year, about his effort or his play or anything like that. So he's always been a solid player for the Eagles, but 26 million is just completely out of the
And
price range.
that role is
Crazy.
now just going to be passed down to Moro Jomo, who I think is going
Yeah.
to be
Well,
equally
that was a point that
effective,
I
if
said
not even
today
better
after
in that role.
when CJ Gardner Johnson got traded today. The first thought to me, I was like, all these guys from this 2023 draft class now have to step up. I mean, we saw Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter, the 2 first-round picks, already make their impact. But you got to think of the guys. They drafted Tyler Steen in the 3rd round, may be the starting guard now. We don't know how that's going to shape out. The next pick after that in the actual draft, it was 66 and 67. Sidney Brown was the safety that they drafted. They just traded CJ Gardner Johnson away. He looks like a guy that he could fill in, or maybe it's the other Georgia kid, Lewis Seen, who hasn't
Yeah,
really
I
shown
forgot
anything
about
this year.
Lewis Seen. As long as it's not Tristan McCullum,
Yeah. Bro, I
I think
just found out for some reason was 6'3". I had no clue that he was that tall. I
hmm,
never he doesn't even look that tall
no, yeah.
on the screen or
But
anything like that.
me and
But
you have, I would say me
yeah,
and
but
you
real
have
quickly,
both
let me just
been,
go through the line of like the rest of the 2023 class. So this was the
yeah.
2023 class. You had Jalen Carter at 9, Nolan Smith at 30. Then you had Tyler Steen, like second or third pick of the third round. Sidney Brown, the next pick after that. Keeley Ringo in the fourth round. And then you had Tanner McKee and Moro Jomo all in that same draft class. So that was your draft class for 2023. We saw the impact that all those guys can make now. And some of these guys are going to be asked to be starters on the Eagles roster next season.
Yeah, and the one that isn't going to be asked to be a starter is at least getting an elevated role, and that's Tanner McKee. Keeley Ringo, as of right now, is obviously your second outside corner with both Isaiah Rogers and Darius Slay gone. I have a lot of confidence in Keeley
Darius Slay,
Ringo.
the situation is a little bit sticky right now because it's like they haven't actually released him. They might actually try and trade him to Pittsburgh, and the rumor was Pittsburgh, and it looked like it was completely finished yesterday, and then it kind of lost some steam a little bit, and it seems like they're still negotiating, and there's been no talk from Darius Slay on social media about him signing there yet. So I don't know exactly what's happening with that situation. Maybe he could be convinced with how he sees everything played out, even more so with, we haven't even talked about the comments between CJ Gardner-Johnson and Darius Slay, which how important is it actually now to even bring that up and talk about it if both of them aren't on the roster? You know what I mean? But we obviously had that dust up and that flare up earlier in the week about some of the comments that Darius Slay has been making about CJ Gardner-Johnson, the way that he's been taking them. But I don't really know how important it is to even mention that now. Everybody probably knows about that dust up, and those two guys aren't on the roster anymore. So maybe that's more inclination that Darius Slay could land back with the Eagles if there was an actual rift between him and C. Dick Gardner Johnson. They just got rid of him. I don't think they would do that to bring Darius Slay back specifically, but even CJ said himself that the young guys had to get paid, and he understood. And just like I said, wanted to get traded to a championship team. And that's just the direction. It's just
Yeah,
odd.
and he goes to the Texans, a good team, a playoff
Yeah,
team.
but
However,
it's like
they're
this. I feel like
depleting their
people are,
offensive line right now, which is not
yeah,
the best.
but I feel like people are getting really anxious with the Eagles because this is like uncharted territory, which we've never been in the position where we had such a good roster on both sides of the ball. We had such good young players. Like when we won the Super Bowl 52, there wasn't really a nucleus core of the team that was like set to move on for the future. You know what I mean? Like Alshon Jeffrey might have been around the same age as AJ Brown, but what, he had two good seasons maybe after that, if that, after signing with the Eagles. And they didn't have Devontae Smith. They had Nelson Aguilar, who ended up leaving the roster a little bit after that. They had a platoon at running back, like a committee by running back, and none of those guys stayed around. Carson Wentz,
Yeah,
their
Jai
investment at
got hurt
quarterback,
the next
crumbled.
year.
They had obviously a good offensive line, which they've always had, but Brandon Brooks ended up leaving. Um, Fletch was the face of the defense, but a lot of the guys were kind of just makeshift put together. Like the Patrick Robinsons of the world that just had that one flare up season and then that was it. So this is uncharted territory, and people are like, why are they, scraping
Well,
the
it
roster?
does feel very similar to 2022 when after going to the Super Bowl, we lost a ton of guys. A lot were on defense. We lost Miles Sanders and TJ Edwards and CJ Gardner Johnson. This is the second time we've lost him following the Super Bowl appearance, and some other guys as well that just off
Like,
the top
but
of my head
but
I
I
can't
felt like a lot
exactly
of these types of moves also could be, Sweat and Williams are definitely good players, but like losing like Isaiah Rogers, like he was a solid corner, but he's not irreplaceable. And it's like kind of like losing Marcus Epps from that, 2022 run. You know what I mean? That it was
Yeah,
kind of
no,
like
none of these guys are exactly crucial. I think the loss that's gonna hurt us the most is gonna be Josh Sweat. A lot of people would say CJ Gardner Johnson, but I've been wanting to see Sidney Brown get his chance for a while
yeah,
now.
we've been talking about Sidney Brown, and there's a lot of good prospects in the draft. I love all the
Well,
talent.
and the one guy who's expected to fall to the to late first round, who's a safety, who's also out of Georgia, is Malachi Stark. So that could be a possibility for the Eagles' first round pick.
That's not even the first safety that I would draft. I like him, and I would be down with that draft pick. But that kid from, I'm looking up his name right now because it's kind of hard
What
to
from
say. South Carolina, the
Alabama?
6'3" kid,
What's that?
Nick Eamon-Ware.
Mm.
Ran like a 4.3, 6'3", 225 pounds. Ran a 4.3 at the combine. First round graded guy. There's a good chance he goes into the
Yeah,
top 15 of the draft. Even
they
though
could also
safeties.
go edge. They could also go edge in
But
in
the
the
thing
first
about
round and
safety that
sort
is
of
good though,
account for the loss of Josh Sweat.
but the thing
It,
about safety that's good is it's usually a position where there's like a lot of talent always at that position, but it's also one of the undervalued positions in the draft where they're always slipping. I mean, remember when
yeah,
Derwin James dropped down to like pick 16 and the Chargers ended up scooping him, and he was probably seen as one of the 5 best players in that entire draft. So I mean,
yeah,
look
that
at
is a very
these.
good point.
Listen to these. You didn't hear about this kid from South Carolina yet? Listen to these measurables at the combine. This is one of the craziest combine performances I've ever seen. 4.38 40. 10-yard split was literally 1.49. He's running 10 yards in 1.49 seconds, which is crazy. 43-inch vertical leap.
Mm,
43. 11.6 broad jump.
damn.
20 reps on the bench press as a safety.
And who is this?
Nick Eamon-Ware.
How do you spell his name?
Emman.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, he's an absolute specimen.
Yeah, let me put. I mean, hey, the measurables are out there. Let me pull up his stats. What did
They're
he do
saying
his
his
senior year?
comparisons to Jeremy Chin, who's a
88
fan.
tackles, 4 picks, 2 pick sixes out of those 4 picks. 3 tackles for loss. Yeah, this dude is a
Well, that's
monster.
also something that people forget about Keeley Ringo is like Keeley Ringo literally is like 6'2", 200 pounds and runs like a 4.35.
Yeah, I listen. I like
I
Keelan
love
Ringo a
all the
lot.
measurables about Keeley Ringo. If he can learn from the younger defensive backs and even like, what he's learned probably from Slay being there and maybe James Bradbury and how they mentor those guys, like I feel like he just actually hasn't gotten his opportunity. He was behind Rodgers on the depth chart last year, and they were obviously high on Rodgers. I think Ringo is a guy that they've really just been kind of like waiting in the stacks. And I think Ringo is going to kind of have the ascension that Nakobe Dean has had this past season to where like he hasn't had his opportunity. He's been on the roster for a while, but when he actually gets a chance to go into the starting lineup, especially with talent around him in the position group, then I think he's going to shine and be able to do his thing. So at corner, I mean, I'm full on with Keeley Ringo, so that's why I'm not really
Yeah,
upset
I
about
have a
Rodgers
lot of
moving on
comments
or
in Keelan
Slay.
Ringo. I like every player that it if the season were to start today, I like every player that is currently stepping up for the guys that we've lost. I mean, I like Tyler Steen a lot. I've said that many times. I like Keeley Ringo a lot. I like Sidney Brown a lot. I've said that many times. I think he has phenomenal range as a safety. I like Jalix Hunt a lot, and these are guys that as of and for Oren Burks as the backup linebacker, you put Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in that spot instead now, who I also like. That's just another guy that we lost, but you know, and that's how things are right now. We haven't even finished free agency yet. Who knows if the Eagles bring somebody in? I think it would be very smart if the whole strategy is to free up money down the line, which they've done. I think it's very smart to use the cap space that you have this season to bring in somebody on a 1-year deal to help you out now. So you have one less hole to fill. And then you also have the draft coming up where with, your first two selections, your first round, your second round selection, you're probably going to take somebody that you can expect to sort of step up in one of those roles, possibly, whether that's
Yeah, I
a
really,
safety
I
or an
don't
edge
think.
rusher. I think they really, and I think in the first 2 rounds, whether it's round 1 or round 2, I think they really, really, really should take an edge rusher or an interior lineman.
I'm not going to force the issue. It depends on what's on the board. I think there's a good
Yeah,
chance
no, it
I see
depends what's on the
there.
board, but I
I
think
would
I
take
think
I
that
would
would
take
be the best
there's
possible
also a
outcome.
couple guys in this draft that are off ball and edge rush linebackers, like Jahad Campbell from Alabama, who I like a lot. There's a couple guys like that in this draft that have been off ball linebackers, then got asked. Like Abdul Carter started off as an off ball linebacker and then got moved to an edge rusher. So that's like new of the norm nowadays. So um, there might be a player like that that's available versatility. It also, like I said, we have all that trade ammo with those 4 5th round picks to move up in the draft and, maybe package them up or future draft picks. I think Howie could be aggressive in that department. And I don't think the Eagles really never ever needed to be a first wave free agency team in this free agency. Some of the moves that are being reported, like CJ obviously getting traded, was a shock. That was never in the plans of what I thought. It's not like it was ever like he was an untouchable player or anything like that. But we kind of just like boiled it down to Sweat's going to get too much money. Williams is going to get too much money. There's a chance with Mekhi Becton. Rodgers could come back if they wanted to. Like the Eagles, if they felt like Isaiah Rodgers was their next starting corner, would have made an aggressive move to keep him here. Because I mean, he's making $7.5 million per year. So for a starting corner, if they believe that at his age, they would have paid that, in my opinion. So Oren
Yeah,
Burks,
and
like
the
I said, we're
other
going to
thing
let
to
him
note
walk.
too is, listen, they made the move that had to be made. The most important, non-negotiable, keep Zach Bond. They've kept Zach Bond. That was the most important thing they had to do. The other guys, if they have to go, they have to go. But they kept Zach Bond. That's what they needed to do. That's what they
Well,
got
the one I
done.
was like getting at with saying that was like with CJ, we didn't expect him to move on, and now like another kind of, it could possibly happen. We still don't know if it's going to happen or not. Dallas Goddard could be being moved on from as well. So those are two guys that we thought age wise matched up with the timeline of the team and could be kept around, and they have a lot of talent. They're pretty similar talent wise at their position. And what the market would be at their position for their talent level, but at the end of the day, I mean, draft picks are there for a reason. The one thing Howie has done extremely well over the past, since we drafted Jalen Hurts, I would say, even though he drafted Jalen Reagor before Jalen Hurts, drafted Milton Williams after Jalen Hurts. Since that Jalen Hurts draft pick, he's been on fire with draft picks. So even talking about trading draft picks, maybe to move up and draft a guy, like they do with Cooper DeJean, and even do it with a foe like the Commanders, like they did. And they made two trades with the Commanders last season, which was funny how they met in the NFC Championship afterwards. But with Howie drafting that well, I feel like you just have to put all full faith into that. And you also have to realize that the Eagles are a destination that people want to go to now. So the first wave of free agency is going to hit, and most of those guys are just looking for the biggest possible payday because they're the most attractive free agents. Then you start boiling down to the guys that are actually looking to maybe just compete for a championship. Money's not the number one priority. And those are the second to third to fourth wave guys. And look at some of the guys that they brought in. They traded for CJ Gardner-Johnson right before the season started in 2022. They got James Bradbury in 2022. And what? I think it was May that they signed him. And they've also made some other trades in the past at the end of the season. I mean, they flipped Sam Bradford, right before Carson Wentz got his thing, right before the season started. 6 days before the season started, got a first-round pick. So, I mean, Howie's always wheeling and dealing. Just because other teams have been so anxious because their season ended in the beginning of January doesn't mean that Howie Roseman has to do it. Because, I mean, it's felt like we won the Super Bowl, what? It's the 11th. We won the Super Bowl on the 9th of February, and everyone's already starting to, talk about all the Eagles aren't putting all their chips in to win another Super Bowl. Like we still have the same core and nucleus on offense. I mean, we're literally losing possibly two players that are starters on offense, and everybody else is around. And we kept all of our best. I mean, Josh Sweat, you could argue, was one of our best defensive players, Slay as well. But outside of Slay and Josh Sweat, all those guys that we lost, we have all of our best defensive players still on the roster.
Yeah, I mean when you consider who the best players on defense were this past season,
And the
none of the
thing
guys we
also about
lost
that
are
comment,
guys you would name.
real quickly, like Slay, he was one of the best players this past season, but not retaining him. He's fallen down the totem pole to to being the third best corner on the team next season. So that would
Yeah,
be the
absolutely.
case.
I mean, listen, he'll be another year older, another year of regression.
Still really
Um,
good, but we have two of the best young
yeah,
corners in the entire league.
when you look at the Eagles' best players on defense from this past season, I mean, it's Zach Bond, it's N'Kobe Dean, it's Cooper DeJean, it's Quinyon Mitchell, it's Jalen Carter.
The
Um,
best player, Jalen Carter.
Yeah, the best player being Jalen Carter. And then you could also throw Nolan Smith into that conversation if you consider how good he was once he started to ramp up. Um, so listen, I think the Eagles are going to be just fine. I think most of the fan base is completely overreacting. But enough of Eagles free agency talk because it is now time for my meatball of the week. And my meatball of the week doesn't have a name this week. I have no idea what this person's name is. I don't even know what their face looks like. All I know is I spotted them at a bar on Saturday night. And just for this, they need to be the meatball of the week. And that is this man in an Al Horford jersey. What are you doing? For to even buy that jersey, at the time when we brought in Al Horford is insane. At the very least,
Well, that's you texted me that, and what did I say back to? I said something very specific to the money
you
that was spent on that jersey
said
potentially.
you said hopefully he bought that on sale for $10.
Like, if he
That would
spent
have been
any
too
more,
much money for it. That would have been but here's the thing, even if you bought that jersey when he came to the Sixers, that's odd enough. But after that, first of all, after that disaster of a season with Al Horford, and then him going to OKC, and then back to the Celtics and winning a ring with the Celtics, that makes it really insane to wear the jersey after all of that.
and he's
It
still
makes
playing
it
for
a
the Celtics
violation, in
too.
my opinion. But when you also consider how bad the Sixers are right now, to come out to a bar wearing a Sixers Al Horford jersey is the most insane behavior I've ever witnessed. So, this random man, whoever you are, you're my meatball of the week.
I thought the meatball of the week could have went another way. I thought a guy that I would nominate for meatball of the week, just because this was a team that the Eagles have been
This guy kind
battling
of
with.
looks like an off-brand Tommy Cutlets now that I look at this photo again.
I can't even see it. It's kind of blurry. I would have to
Oh,
look it
well.
up on my
What are
phone.
you gonna say?
But a potential meatball of the week candidate, or maybe just meatball of I don't even know what's going on for how long time period. John Lynch, the GM of the 49ers. You want to look at some of the
Oh yeah,
departures this
they've lost
offseason
everyone.
for the 49ers.
Hmm.
So here's the departure here. Traded Debo Samuel, lost Kyle Juszczyk,
Mm-hmm.
lost Leonard Floyd, who signed with the Falcons, lost
Yep, yep,
Javon
yep.
Hargrave, he signed with the
Mm-hmm.
Vikings, lost Malik Collins.
Mm.
That's 3 defensive linemen right there. They were all cut. And then left in free agency, Dre Greenlaw, linebacker,
Mm.
Charvarius Ward, who said before the season ended that he was going to leave because he had like a fatal situation with his family this season, which was very unfortunate, and said he wanted a clean slate and a fresh start. And he got 3 years, $60 million. So he's a good corner. He's a solid corner. I think he went to Indy, if I believe correctly. Tulana Hufunga, who's actually a good young safety. I think he was banged up the past couple of years, had like a season-ending injury, but he's a good young safety. Aaron Banks, guard. Tackle Jalen Moore, so 2 of their offensive linemen. And then running back Elijah Mitchell and quarterback Josh Dobbs. That's a lot of people to be losing. That's a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
people. And all those guys are impactful
absolutely.
players too. All those
Yeah,
guys are
no,
impactful. So
and you have Christian McCaffrey coming off an injury next season,
Brandon Ayuk
who
on that contract
has
that just had a
struggled to stay
season-ending
healthy
injury.
throughout most of his career. The 49ers are definitely in trouble. I think they're going to have a bad year next season. I think their time as a contender, that window has been missed. Um,
I think they're gonna. I think there's a good chance they draft Will Johnson, the corner, if he's there from Michigan, which would be a really good draft pick for them if he's there. But Trent Williams is 37 years old, and
yeah,
they just lost 2 of their offensive linemen. They really need some offensive line help, and they just need trench help in general. They'll probably get Joey Bosa I tweeted earlier when Joey Bosa got released. I tweeted death, taxes, and Joey Bosa going to play with his brother in San Fran. So I think that's an absolute lock to happen, and that's just
That'd
a
be
matter of days
interesting.
until they
Yeah.
announce that. That'll be a good addition and signing. But that's not a youthful signing. We're talking about an injury-prone player that's like 30 years old. So um,
Yeah.
looks like they're kind of fading.
Nick
It felt
Bosa
like
is. I mean, Nick Bosa is. I mean, Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa is a guy I wouldn't mind the Eagles bring in. There's a few edge rushers
would
still
you still be
available in
interested in
free
Von
agency.
Miller, who's played for Vic Fangio before? I feel like
Hell,
Von Miller. I feel
I
like
didn't even
Von
know
Miller.
Von Miller is still in the league.
He got cut by the Bills, but with Von Miller, I feel like a guy like with his skill trait
How
of what
old
he
is
does as
he?
a pass rusher, like the older he gets, the less explosive he gets, and it's harder for him to bend around the corner and get that edge rush like he did in his prime. I mean, I think at this point you're not getting prime Von Miller, but I mean maybe a guy
Well,
that's
you're not
more
even getting
consistent.
close to prime Von Miller. Prime Von Miller that ended. The
But I
final year
mean,
of prime Von Miller was 2018.
this could also,
The
but one of
question
these
is
like
if he would
veteran
even
type
be
of guys,
effective anymore.
one of these like veteran types of guys. No, Von Miller actually has like I think had the seventh highest pass rush win rate last season, even though his numbers
Mm.
weren't there like all totality sack wise, but he's actually been
Well, he did
winning.
have 6 sacks, which is pretty decent.
But I mean, like, would you replace? Like, would you be? I mean, I would fully be on board with. They're
I wouldn't
completely
hate
different players.
bringing him in on a cheap contract at all.
No, but I'm
A
saying,
cheap
would you
one-year
bring like
deal.
Von Miller in? That could be your guy that replaces. Like, if Brandon Graham retires, that could be your veteran replacement that plays like around that. He would give you more snaps than Brandon
I
Graham's
would.
able to do.
I'll
But
say this. I think I would have a little more confidence in Von Miller going into next season than Brandon Graham.
oh,
So yeah,
100%.
no, I
I
wouldn't
mean,
hate that at all. But there are some other edge rushers who are still available in free agency. The guy I wanted the most going into today, who's no longer available, is Chase Young, who ended up
yeah, so
staying
did
with the
I.
Saints.
I would have
Um,
full, and he got less money than Josh Sweat, which makes sense. He hasn't really had any signature moments, but like 17 million per, I would have paid that every day of the week, just like the Saints did.
and
And 3 years, I didn't think that he would be willing to sign a 3-year deal. That's a deal that you could have actually done and still gotten a Carter and Nolan Smith and the future deals done. And by the time the cap went up, when you pay those deals out, 17 million for a guy like Chase Young would still be a bargain.
the guy that's still available that I would really like is Dante Fowler.
He
He
was on
is
Washington last year. He was a former third overall pick
10 and
too.
a half sacks this past year in Washington.
He
You
was a
know,
former Cowboy too, so he's almost
he
about the
was
same.
he was a part of that 2017 Jaguars defense that went to the AFC Championship game. Which shows you the age of Dante Fowler. Although he's only 30, but I mean 2017, that feels like so long ago. So I would like to see the Eagles go after Dante Fowler if that's still a possibility, on possibly another 1-year deal. Hopefully, I think if even if you have to spend 10 million to get someone significant here in a 1-year deal, maybe even more than 10 million, as long as it's a 1-year deal, spend whatever as long as you're able to spend it, and
I
just
think
keep the
there's
books
a good
open for
chance.
the future seasons.
But I think there's a good chance they do that. But Howie's always got something up his sleeve, like a Jahan Dotson or a Kenyon Green type trade. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah,
like maybe even like if they complete a Dallas Goddard trade, maybe they can get a guy that's like comparable to like a
getting
young.
rid of Dallas Goddard would free up a ton of money. I was just looking at it.
There's
He
a
doesn't
14
have
million, right?
any guaranteed money
Yeah, it's just outright
this year
whatever
and
you're
next year.
getting rid of.
Next year, his salary is 23 million. None of that is guaranteed. So that would go a long way with freeing up money for this year and next year. But anyway, let's talk Phillies baseball. Season starting soon. Spring training still underway. When talking about the Phillies, I mean, not really much has changed the past week, um, in terms of performances or anything. But one guy who is having a very great spring that I want to give a shout out to is Rincones Jr. He's having a terrific spring.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's actually gonna be able to impact it. Like, I hate. I hate the whole prospects with baseball. I hate it. I hate it so much. I feel like these guys get so hyped up. We see flashes of them. It's like every year they get thrown in our face in spring training. We see them a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean it
Maybe they
happens
have a
every
little
year.
stint in the MLB, and then we never actually get to see them. And these are the type of guys right now that there's problems with the Phillies, but like they somehow aren't the solutions for the Phillies too, which makes me aggravated. Like they have pitching problems, but they won't bring up some of their top prospects, or they have a problem in the outfield, but they have a top prospect there, and they just won't bring him up to the majors to play. Their questions, they have questions at third base, but they have an absolute stud infielder that plays third base that's waiting to come up, and they just don't pull the trigger to make that happen. So you know I don't know how much I can actually get hype on Gabriel Rincones Jr. when I don't know if I'll actually ever see him or when I actually will see him in the MLB. So we talked about on the last podcast. I think it was his birthday last podcast we did, and he turned 24 years old. He got talked up by a lot of different guys in the organization, but I feel like I hear that stuff all the time with baseball. And like there's 162 games, so I would like to just start seeing these top prospects get a shot. Then, no disrespect at all to a South Jersey guy, but why can't our top prospects get more of an opportunity than like them bringing up guys like Buddy Kennedy? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, hey, listen, I'm happy to see that Aiden Miller has gotten a bit of an opportunity in spring training so far. I didn't really consider that they would give him playing time in spring training this early on. So that's good. I also didn't realize he's as fast as he is. That is something I didn't know about Aiden Miller. I didn't realize he has that kind of speed. He's pretty fast out there. Um, but um, but yeah, I don't know. It feels like sometimes you go into spring training, wanting to see a certain prospect that you're excited to see more out of, and then instead of him, there's just some random guy you haven't really even heard of. Um,
Who do you think's the most likely to actually come up with the prospects? Is probably you would probably put like the rankings. Probably Andrew Painter's the biggest lock,
oh
and
yeah,
then
absolutely, Andrew
position player
Painter.
wise, I feel like that's the hardest path for any of those prospects. I mean, Ada Miller is probably the most likely. I would say Justin Crawford after that. Maybe Rincones fits somewhere in between that or right after those guys. But um, there's two high prospect guys that we've seen can contribute to the team. With Justin Crawford with the skill set of what he's done at the lower levels, and then Rincon is what he's done in spring training, and there's outfield problems. So I just don't want to see these outfield problems, continue for what a third seasons now, and them not be shaped up with just adding a prospect. Like, what's the worst that you can possibly have? Like, what's the worst that can possibly happen? Didn't was it the Padres last year? They had that one kid, Jackson Churio is his name or something close to that. Not
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Padres,
yeah.
not the Padres, the Brewers, and he hit like a 2 or 3 run home run in like the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning of the playoff game that they had. He was like 20 years old. Like that's the type of impact that those guys can make. I mean, Bryce
Yeah,
Harper
or
came
you could be
at
Kenny
19.
Powers and come in for the first time in the ninth inning of the World Series with the bases loaded and throw the World Series clinching strikeout. That could happen as well.
Yeah, I'm just saying, maybe not the biggest moments that I'm throwing out there, and portraying, but I would just like to see these guys. I don't want to see a whole season about them trying to figure out if Rojas is the guy, then baiting us with, talk about them possibly making a move at the trade deadline. There's being all these rumors, and then they just sit out there and, whiff on a guy like Austin Hayes or something.
Yeah, well, one thing I will say, in terms of the non-prospects, right now Bryce Harper is batting 381 in the spring. That's very encouraging. They put up 18 runs today against the Red Sox. The last 2 days I haven't really even kept up with the Phillies spring training just because I've been locked in on NFL free agency. So I'm just seeing this now. The Phillies put up 18 on the Red Sox.
But they
Two.
reverted back to the old lineup too, didn't they? They've reverted back to the Kyle Schwarber at leadoff and Trey Turner at second.
It looks like they had Stott batting leadoff from what I can tell.
Well, that was based off
But
today, but I
Stott
know.
had 2 hits, an RBI, 2 walks, 2 runs scored. Johan Rojas had 2 hits and RBI. Brandon Marsh, 2 walks, a hit, an RBI. Alec Boehm, 1 hit, 2 runs scored, a walk, 2 ribbies. Buddy Kennedy, the guy you were mentioning, he had a home run. He had 3 ribbies, so I guess that was a 3-run homer. Um, Christian Arroyo. That's another guy who Christian Arroyo and Rodolfo Castro, actually 2 guys who I think have been from what I've seen, it seems like they've been having a good spring. Gabriel Rincones Jr.
They also have a guy
He
in
had
their
2
lower
walks.
levels. They had a catcher in their lower levels that played like all of like it was either single A or double. I'm pretty sure it was single A last year, and he was like 17 years old throughout the entire season. So maybe that's some guy. That's also a position that they're gonna have to figure out sometime soon is the catcher position. There really hasn't been too much
I mean,
traction
I like
outside of
Marshawn.
the JT trade.
I'm a little high on Marshawn. I like Marshawn. Now, the pitching for this 8-run game, the Red Sox put up 8 runs against the Phillies in this game. All the earned runs came from 2 pitchers. Mick Abel, who gave up 3 runs in 1 2/3 innings. McAble, talk about prospects I'm high on. That's a prospect I've been low on for quite a while. Is McAble, and Devin Sweet, a name I've not heard of. He gave up 3 runs, but you had Jose Alvarado, Jordan Romano,
And Jose had
Michael
3 strikeouts today,
Mercado,
didn't he?
all the Ottos and Anos. They each came in through for an inning, no earned runs. Jose Alvarado gave up. Uh, oh no, yeah, no earned runs. There was only 6 earned runs
And
accounted
Jose
for.
Alvarado, he had 3 strikeouts today, didn't he?
Yeah, he had 3 strikeouts. Jordan Romano had a strikeout. Um, and then Mick Abel and Nelson Alvarez each had a strikeout. So not a ton of strikeouts in the game, but yeah. So listen, from the talent you expect to play well, today those guys performed well. For a big question mark like McAble, he did not, but I've never expected anything out of McAble, if I'm being honest.
Well, what do you think about the bullpen now with the new injury to Matt Strom? And most likely he's not going to be ready for opening day, and that's the best
The
reliever
bullpen
times
scares me.
10.
The bullpen scares me a bit. They got rid of most of the good pitchers from last year in the bullpen. The one guy who I really like, Jeff Hoffman, they got rid of him. I still am not happy they got rid of Sir Anthony Dominguez. Um, yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
very high on the
that
bullpen.
was pretty bizarre the way that they gutted their bullpen last trade deadline, and then it
Yeah,
was all for guys that they brought in for literally like 2 months, only for them to just not be
yeah,
Phillies.
it made no sense. I mean, most of the moves this organization make, they just
I mean, the one
frustrate
guy they
me.
got last trade deadline that's actually gonna have to step up is like Tanner Banks, and like I don't even know how much I actually
I forgot all
really.
about Tanner Banks. And just to wrap things up with this statement, um, Howie, the things he has done so far, he hasn't made the greatest moves, but I have my full trust in him. I do not have much trust in the Phillies front office. I have no trust in the Sixers front office. I have very little trust in the Phillies front office at this point.
Do you think Mitch Kepler's gonna or Max Kepler's gonna end up being a
No,
solid?
he's just
I
Whit
mean, he's got some
Merrifield.
pop in
He's
spring
Whit
training.
Merrifield all over again.
I mean, we can say that they're obviously very different players, but we'll see the
Yeah, they're
impact.
very different players, but this just feels like another
Kepler's
Whit
also actually
Merrifield
being
signing.
brought on to like actually start too. Like he's giving that opportunity, knowing that we like um last year. Why am I drawing a blank when you just said his name? What's his name again? I'm forgetting his name from Whit Merrifield. I don't
Yeah,
know why I just drew a blank on his name. Whit Merrifield last year, like he didn't have a set spot. He was just like kind of playing all over the place, never got rhythm, and yeah, it was just kind of a mess in that situation. Also, a lot older than Kepler is right now. So, I mean, if Kepler can at least be like an above average outfielder, I mean, that will just help the Phillies out so much because their 2 biggest question marks on their
but that
team are
won't
literally
happen.
it's
I don't
literally
see
left
that
field and center
happening.
field. So, I mean, with all the rumors about Bryce being willing to move back to the outfield if they can find like guys there, I mean, if you can move Nick Castellanos to left field, Bryce back to right, find something that's steady at center, and get a solid offensive first baseman that can play above average defense that's better than Alec Boehm and Reese Hoskins' defense, then I think you'll do it. I think you'll feel very confident to it. So, opening day, we're what? Today is Tuesday. We're 16 days away from opening day.
Wow.
We're actually a
Yeah,
week away
that
from
flew by.
we're a week away from the start of the MLB season, though, because the Cubs and the Dodgers will be playing March
Yeah, the
18th,
Tokyo
Tokyo series, which
series.
is March
And of course
18th,
they're
6
rolling
a.m.
out. Of course they're each rolling out their Japanese pitcher for game one of that, which I think is kind of funny. Where
What
it's like
else would you
really
expect to happen?
showcasing.
Yeah, I wish the Phillies would have got Cody Bellinger from the Cubs this past offseason, but you can't have it all. So we'll see if
What are you
they're
gonna
they're
do?
active on the trade deadlines. You know how we talked about Laurie Markkinen, just not hearing anything about the Laurie Markkinen like trade market after it was so hyped up for him to become a Sixer? Have you heard a single thing about Luis Robert Jr. Potentially getting traded since all the
No.
hype around the
Yeah, no, I
last?
haven't heard anything
It's
about
like the
Robert
same
Jr.
exact thing. I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty crazy, that comparison to each other. But um, what's your predictions for the next podcast?
My predictions for the next podcast, the Sixers lose to the Raptors and get themselves the fifth worst record in the NBA. I think Howie makes some sort of surprising move that's beneficial to the team, whether it's a trade or a signing.
You
And
think that beneficial move for Howie, since everything's been directed towards players departing and not too many players incoming? Do you think that move will have something to do with a player like Dallas Goddard leaving the Eagles and them getting something back in return, or
No,
them
I mean like a
acquiring?
player incoming. I would not hate to see Goddard get traded. With the value you would get from him,
I'll pitch
possibly
one
a round
idea out
pick
there.
and
You
a
know what I
money.
would do?
Yeah.
I would trade Dallas Goddard, try and get a fourth back, and then I would trade the Raiders, try and scheme them on a fifth, but I would still go up the fourth for Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame, who was the guy they drafted in the second round the year before they drafted Brack Bowers last year in the first round. So he's on a rookie contract, former second round pick. That was a high second round pick coming out of Notre Dame. I'm a Notre Dame guy. He's not the most like crazy athletically gifted guy, but like he's like Jason Witten, like an older Jason Witten. Like he gets open, catches the ball all the time, and he has pretty decent run into the catch ability. He's nothing like blazing speed or anything like that, but that would be a trade to get younger at that position and have a controllable contract that's a rookie contract. But you don't have the it's not like you trade for Jahan Dotson, you have the extra control year of for being a first round pick. He's a second round pick. So that's also something they have to be mindful with Cooper DeJean hitting so big on Cooper DeJean at that position that gets paid so highly. Quinyon Mitchell, they'll have an extra year of control for him with that fifth round option, even though it most likely won't get to that point. With Cooper DeJean, you're just going to have to pay him after year 3.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, they're gonna have to pay him and Quinyon Mitchell probably in the same offseason. So that's something they gotta be prepared for. But yeah, those are my predictions for next week. Do you have one yourself?
Um, yeah, I predict just like a basic one. I think the Eagles will be active. I think they will sign some players, and I think next week, by the time we do the podcast, I think they will have acquired in some form via trade or an addition or a signing of two quality starting level players that will make an impact for the Eagles. Like not just guys that are depth rotation guys, they will acquire two starting level depth guys.
Yeah, I
Uh,
can see that. I
that will
my
actually
prediction is one. That was kind of my prediction. But yeah,
I think they're
two.
going to get two, and maybe it looks like they're just getting one with all the guys that they bring in, but they could hit on guys that you don't really suspect and like that. And I was also real quickly another point with the Eagles getting rid of Dallas Goddard. Maybe that just opens up the path for Jahan Dotson to actually show out what he's capable of, and the Eagles to start using their third wide receiver. And maybe they could go the
Maybe.
route of not having the craziest like they could go the route of having a blocking tight end that really isn't that big of a factor in the receiving game if they can utilize these three wide receivers and possibly get Saquon more involved in the pass game as well.
I will tell you one guy I would like the Eagles to get in free agency, Kyle Juszczyk. They
Yeah.
demonstrated they're not that they've demonstrated that they like to use the fullback this past season, something we haven't seen since the Andy Reid era in this city.
And you
And
got to factor in Ben Van Zumeren's going to be our starting linebacker over Zach Bond this season. So that's what you have to factor in. So he
that's a
can't
good
play
point.
fullback anymore.
But anyway, that's it for this week.
Yeah, that wraps it up for episode 89 of the Paisan Sports podcast. And we'll be back next week with more NFL free agency. We're going to open up our NFL free agency to talk about more teams than just the Eagles next week, but probably won't be talking about too much Sixers next week, depending on what they do. So we'll
Yeah.
see you on the next podcast, episode 90.